The officer didn't raise his voice. He simply struck the 16-year-old black boy across the face right in front of the judge. The courtroom froze. The boy didn't cry. He didn't shout. He wiped the blood from his lip and looked toward the door. His father had just stepped through it. And suddenly, everything changed. What would you do if someone slapped your child right there in court? This father didn't yell. He didn't threaten. He just walked in and changed everything, without saying a word. You could feel it the moment you stepped into that courtroom. It wasn't just the silence. It was the weight of the eyes that had already decided. They stared before he even sat down. A 16-year-old black boy, wrist-cuffed, walked in flanked by 2 deputies. Not a word from him, not a tear, just quiet steps on a polished floor that suddenly felt too loud. Someone behind me whispered, "He must have done something bad." And just like that, he was guilty, to the room. Officer Doyle took the stand like he'd done it 100 times, calm, sure of himself. He didn't glance at the boy, didn't need to. He had the badge, the bench behind him, the wind at his back. He laid it out smoothly. He resisted, got mouthy. I had to restrain him, like he was reading a weather report. The judge nodded, barely looked up. That nod, that was the real sentence. You could feel the air get heavier. The boy just sat there, still, not stiff, not scared, just like he'd done this before. Hands in his lap, eyes focused, not flinching. He looked at Doyle and for a moment, just a flicker, tilted his head and asked quietly, "Is this your idea of law?" No threat, no attitude, just a question. But it landed like a slap. Doyle froze for half a second, then walked down from the stand. 1 step, 2, and right there in front of the judge, without warning, he backhanded that boy across the face. You could hear the shock ripple, a gasp, a stifled cry, but no one moved. Not the bailiff, not the judge. Just silence. The boy didn't cry, didn't raise his voice. He slowly brought his hand up, wiped the blood from his lip, and smiled. Then looked Doyle in the eyes, steady and unshaken, and said, "You just made a mistake you'll regret forever." Not loud, but it rang. Louder than any gavel in that room. The slap had landed, but the boy, he didn't fall apart. Didn't even react the way people expected. No tears, no shouting, just a stillness, the kind that makes a room nervous. As if he knew this wasn't the worst part. They called a recess. People murmured, shifted. The judge stepped out without a glance. And then they brought in the court-appointed defense, Nina Ford. Not new to this building, not new to kids being thrown into it. She walked over quietly, heels clicking soft against tile, and crouched beside the boy, careful not to crowd him. "I'm Nina. They've asked me to represent you. Can you tell me your name?" He glanced sideways, slow, measured, and for the first time since he walked in, he spoke. Names don't mean anything in here. No attitude in his voice, no defiance. Just experience, like someone who'd seen this place chew up names before. Nina studied him. He didn't look scared, not even angry. Just heavy, like something was sitting on him that no one else could see. "Still," she said gently, "I'd like to know what to call you." A pause, then a breath. Jalen Carter. She jotted it down, ran it through her notes. No priors, no red flags. But that only made her more curious. Because something about this boy didn't match. The paperwork. He wasn't fidgeting, wasn't defensive. His body didn't speak fear. It spoke control, the kind that's taught, not born. And that's when she noticed it, a thin silver chain tucked beneath the collar of his shirt. Not flashy, not for show, just something he wore close, like it. Wasn't for anyone else to see. She didn't mean to look, but it caught the light as he adjusted his seat. So she leaned ever so slightly, and her eyes caught the engraving. Carter Field Office, FBI. Her breath stopped. She didn't say anything, not yet. Just looked back at him. He saw it in her eyes, knew she'd read it. And without a word, he reached up, tucked the chain back into his shirt, and turned away. Not hiding. Just done explaining. "Whatever you think that means," he said, voice low. "It doesn't change how they see me in here." That was the moment she realized. He wasn't trying to win this case. He was just trying to survive it. They say court recess is for catching your breath. But for Jalen, it was just the next round. The judge had stepped out. Most folks drifted into quiet talk, tapping phones, sipping coffee. But the boy, he sat, alone at the defense table, still cuffed. And that's when two officers walked over. Not quick, not loud, just casual, like they'd done it a dozen times before. "We're doing a drug sweep," one of them said flatly. "Protocol." Right there in the middle of the courtroom, they yanked open his backpack, tore through notebooks, dumped out pens, unzipped every pocket like they were sure something was hiding, even pulled out a sandwich wrapped in foil, tossed it aside like trash. And he just sat there, watching them tear through the pieces of a life already judged. Nina stood up fast. "He's not under arrest for possession. You have no grounds to—" But they cut her off. "Ma'am, we're doing our job. You can file a complaint later." Later. Always later. That word was a brick wall they threw up every time you tried to breathe. One officer scribbled something on a clipboard, tore the sheet, slapped it down beside the mess. Suspicious behavior filed. No drugs, no anything. But still, a mark. Jalen didn't move, didn't protest. He reached over slowly and packed his things back into the backpack, one by one. Carefully. Like it was muscle memory. That's when the second officer, a younger one, maybe mid-30s, leaned toward his partner and muttered, loud enough for all of us to hear, "Look at him. A future inmate, not a student." Time didn't stop, but hearts did. Even Nina froze. Jalen zipped the bag shut, kept his eyes low, as if he knew this part by heart. Then Doyle stepped back in, arms crossed, that same crooked smile. He tossed a folded sheet under the judge's bench. "Your Honor, I'd like to add resisting arrest and obstruction to the report. The defendant became uncooperative during transport." Simons barely looked at the paper, didn't ask a question, didn't ask the boy. He simply adjusted his glasses, clicked his pen. "Charges noted, added to the docket." Just like that. And then he said it, so calm, so bureaucratic, like he was adding ketchup to an order already coming. Sometimes you have to treat them like what they'll become. The room didn't gasp this time, because they weren't surprised, only sickened. Nina clenched her jaw. The boy didn't flinch. And I remember sitting there thinking he wasn't just on trial. He was being told who he was allowed to become. By the time court resumed, Nina was ready. She'd been quiet through the break, but something had shifted. Not fear, not panic. Focus. She walked to the center of the courtroom with a flash drive in her hand, the way a surgeon might hold a scalpel. No trembling, no big speech. "Your Honor," she began, voice steady, "I have new evidence, recorded from a civilian security camera on the corner of Darrow and 5th. The judge raised an eyebrow. Didn't speak. "It shows the incident Officer Doyle described. And it tells a very different story." She handed the flash drive to the clerk. The screen blinked. The footage played. It wasn't crystal clear, but it didn't have to be. There, grainy but visible, Jalen, standing between Officer Doyle and an elderly black man who looked terrified and confused. The man had a cane, moved slowly, was saying something inaudible, but pleading. Doyle shoved him, hard. The man stumbled backward, and Jalen, just a kid, caught him. He didn't throw a punch, didn't yell. He stood between them, held out both arms, like a human shield. That was it. And in that moment, you could feel the room stop breathing. Even a few jurors leaned forward. It was clear. Too clear. Nina looked to the judge. This footage contradicts Officer Doyle's sworn statement, and it shows that my client acted to prevent harm, not cause it. For a moment, it felt like something had cracked open, like maybe, today would be different. But then, Judge Simons leaned back, removed his glasses, wiped them, and said, without looking up, "Unverified footage, dismissed." No explanation. No pause. Just like that, the truth was filed away as irrelevant. You could hear it. That sound a room makes when hope falls flat on the floor. Not a gasp, not a cry, just disappointment. Like watching someone bury a body they swore they'd protect. Nina stood frozen for half a second. But Doyle smiled, wider than he had all morning. "It's always not their fault," he said, "until they're in handcuffs." That was when Jalen looked up. For the first time since that slap. Lifted his head and spoke. Quiet, not for show, but with weight. "You are not the first to bury the truth, but I might be the last to stay buried." The words didn't echo. They didn't need to. They landed. And that was when it started. The shifting in seats, the murmurs, the tightening in the chest, of every person who'd ever seen someone like him pushed down and told to stay there. People weren't just watching anymore. They were feeling. They were angry. But the boy, he went quiet again, hands folded, eyes steady. And for the first time, the courtroom wasn't judging him. It was watching him. Jalen tried to read the silence he wore like a second skin. He hadn't looked angry, hadn't slouched, hadn't even blinked when the judge waved the truth away like dust on a windowsill. But something had shifted. You could feel it. Nah. Leaned toward him. Not to push, just to let him know she was still there. That's when he slid a folded piece of paper toward her. No eye contact, no urgency. She opened it. One line, written neat. "Watch. Don't act. Not yet." It wasn't a plea. It wasn't a question. It was direction. And for a split second, she wasn't sure who was defending whom. Then she noticed it, the way he adjusted his sleeve. Slow. Deliberate. Revealing the watch beneath. At first glance, nothing unusual. Plain black band, metal clasp, digital face. But Na had seen it before. Exactly that model. Issued by the Bureau to family members of agents working in volatile assignments. One tap could send a signal. 2 taps could send more. She said nothing, just looked at him. And he didn't return the glance. Just leaned back, calm, still, like he knew exactly how much time was left on the clock. Somewhere in the back row a man shifted in his seat, not loudly, not nervously. He sat in the corner, a few rows behind the press box. Dark suit, no tie, back straight. Hands clasped gently in front of him. His eyes never left Jalen, not once. Most wouldn't notice him. But if you did, you'd realize something right away. He wasn't watching out of concern. He was watching like someone waiting for confirmation. Marcus Carter had just entered the story, but the room didn't know it yet. And the boy, he didn't look back. Didn't need to. Because silence, when chosen, is louder than any outburst. And sometimes staying still is how you prepare to turn everything. You could tell Doyle thought the courtroom was his again. He leaned back against the rail with that familiar smirk, the kind that came from knowing no one would stop him. Not here. Not now. Not with that badge. The video had been tossed, the truth buried again, and the boy, still sitting there. Still silent, still cuffed. So Doyle did what men like him always do when they think the story's done. He taunted. "No one's here to save you, boy." He didn't shout it. Didn't need to. He said it with the kind of ease that meant he believed it. Believed it so deeply, he didn't even look around first. And for a heartbeat, he was right. Nobody moved. Not the judge, not the bailiff, not the crowd. until one chair scraped softly at the very back of the room. You could barely hear it, but the silence made it loud. A man stood, slow, composed. Dark suit, no tie, clean white shirt. The kind of presence that doesn't announce itself but takes over the room by existing. He walked down the aisle. Not rushed, not hesitant, like he belonged there, like he knew exactly where this path led. Some folks turned, others stared. But the boy didn't move, not even a glance back, because he knew. He'd known. The man reached the front row, paused, then stepped into the open space between the gallery and the bar. And in a voice firm but low, so low it made everyone lean in, he said, "I am." Just 2 words, but they cut clean through the courtroom like a sharp wind through glass. Doyle blinked, stiffened, straightened his shoulders, trying to hold onto whatever authority he thought he still had. But the man was already reaching into his jacket, pulled out a leather badge case, slow, intentional, flipped it open. Gold glinted under the courtroom lights. Not loud, but final. Marcus Carter, Deputy Director, Federal Bureau of Investigation. The words hit like thunder, muffled in velvet. No shouting, no drama, just truth, presented plainly. There was a pause, not in the sentence but in the air. A deep, stretched silence, like the room needed time to understand what it had just heard. Then it happened. One juror shifted, jaw clenched. A reporter dropped her pen. The court clerk looked up, confused. And the judge, he froze. Doyle didn't speak. His face said enough. Because in that moment, the balance tilted. Everything he'd built, the smirks, the power, the comfort, slipped. Marcus didn't. Look at him, not yet. He turned his gaze, slow, deliberate, to Judge Simons, eyes steady, shoulders squared. And then softly, with the weight of law behind every syllable, "You silenced my son." A pause, not for effect, for clarity. Now you'll hear the sound of accountability. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't a performance. It was a fact. Undeniable, unstoppable. Judge Simons didn't blink, didn't breathe, just stared back, pale. Jalin turned slightly in his seat. Still cuffed, still grounded. He looked over his shoulder, not surprised, not smug, and smiled. Just a faint curl of the lips, a moment of softness beneath all that silence. Then, barely loud enough for Na to hear, he said, "Told you someone would notice." No one else spoke. No one dared. Because for the first time since the boy had entered that room, he wasn't the one being watched anymore. The room was still reeling. But Marcus Carter didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He stepped forward slowly, each movement deliberate, not as a father pleading, but as a man who knew the weight of law and how to use it. "Your Honor," he said calmly, eyes locked on Simons, "I am formally requesting a special evidentiary hearing." There was a pause. You could feel it. Simons looked down at the bench, then back at Marcus, trying to keep composure. "On what grounds?" Marcus didn't blink. "On grounds of prosecutorial misconduct, judicial bias, and falsification of testimony by Officer Doyle." Just like that, the mood shifted. Na stood, voice clear and precise. "Your Honor, we are submitting verified footage. It has been reviewed and authenticated by the Federal Bureau of Investigation. It confirms that my client, Jalin Carter, intervened to prevent excessive force being used against an unarmed civilian." A hush fell over the room again as the screen lit up. Same video, but now with an official stamp, time code, FBI watermark. You could see Doyle in the corner of the frame, shoving the old man, Jalin stepping in, protecting. There was no mistaking it. When the video ended, Marcus turned, pulled out another folder, thicker, heavier. He handed it to the clerk. "These are internal affairs documents," he said. 3 separate incidents over the last 5 years involving Officer Doyle. Each one flagged for misconduct. Each one buried. He looked directly at Simons. All 3 cases were scheduled for judicial review. All 3 were dismissed in pre-trial hearings. By you. Simons stiffened. His hand hovered over his gavel. But he didn't strike it. Couldn't. Because this wasn't a courtroom anymore. Not really. It was a reckoning. Marcus took one final step forward. By order of federal authority, he said, louder now, firm. Officer Doyle, you are under arrest for obstruction of justice, abuse of power, and falsifying official records. Gasps. A flash of motion. 2 federal agents in suits appeared. At the side door, stepping into view like shadows called forward by truth, Doyle tried to speak, mouth open. But no sound came. The cuffs went on. Not fast, not rough, just final. In front of everyone, in front of the judge, in front of the boy. He thought was powerless. Simons sat frozen, the color draining from his face. He looked at Marcus. Then at Na. Then at Jalen. But he didn't say a word, didn't defend himself, didn't apologize. Just lowered his gaze and said nothing at all. Because sometimes silence isn't power. Sometimes it's surrender. The moment the cuffs clicked, phones went up. Quietly at first, then all at once. The sound of video recordings filled the room like rainfall after a drought. Within minutes, the footage was online. A shaky clip of Officer Doyle being arrested. Hands behind his back. Face pale as chalk. The caption read, Tiesta, Justice for Jalen. It started small, a few dozen retweets, a handful of TikToks. Then it grew. By noon, it was everywhere. News anchors replayed the moment. Facebook live comments poured in. TikTok duets, Twitter threads, hashtags stacked one over another. Justice for Jalen. Silence is power. The courtroom had fallen, and what happened inside of it was no longer confined to 4 walls. It spilled out into living rooms and feeds and dinner tables. People weren't just watching, they were remembering, they were recognizing, some in disbelief, others in pain, but most with a sense of something long overdue finally catching up. In the gallery, an older black woman stood up slowly. She hadn't spoken all day. But now, as agents led Doyle out in cuffs, she whispered under her breath. He didn't raise his voice. But his silence hit louder than any gavel. And she was right. Because Jalen didn't yell, he didn't beg, he just waited, and when the truth showed up, he met it. Like he'd been expecting it the whole time. That clip of him smiling right before the arrest, that smile became a symbol. A screenshot. A movement. The FBI responded swiftly. An internal review was announced. All judicial decisions made by Judge Simons over the past 5 years would be re-examined. The dominoes had started falling, not out of rage, but out of silence, finally being heard. And for once, justice didn't have to scream to be felt. The doors of the courthouse opened. The world was waiting. Camera flashes, reporters leaning forward with microphones, a line of questions shouted over each other, all blending into a kind of frantic noise. But Jalen didn't rush. He stepped out slowly beside his father, blinking, into the daylight like it didn't surprise him. Someone from the front, a young female reporter, pushed her voice above the rest. "Why didn't you speak up sooner?" Jalen paused. Not to think, just to let the noise settle around the silence he was about to offer. Then he said softly, "Because when justice speaks for you, you don't need to yell." It wasn't a slogan. It wasn't defiance. It was the kind of answer that only comes from someone who has learned to like, see? Not as a deputy director, not as a man with a title or badge, just as a father who had missed too many moments that mattered. Marcus stood beside his son. He leaned in, voice low, just enough for Jalen to hear. "I missed your childhood," he said, "but I won't miss your courage." Jalen didn't reply. He just nodded once. And together, they walked. No hand on a shoulder, no arms linked, Just two men, father and son, moving side by side, step for step, not toward a press conference, not toward a headline, but toward something quieter, deeper, a different kind of history. Behind them, someone started clapping, then another, and soon the sound rose, not like a roar from a crowd, but like respect, gentle, steady. It swelled from the sidewalk, warm, quiet, proud. They didn't wave, they didn't stop, because it wasn't about applause. It was about every boy who'd been told to sit down, every father who thought he'd waited too long, every truth that had been buried beneath uniforms and silence. Now, walking free. They silenced a boy, but they awakened something bigger. If this story moved you, even a little, maybe it's because deep down we all want to believe silence can still speak volumes. And dignity, even when quiet, can still change the room. Jalen didn't fight with noise. He stood with purpose. And, in doing so, he reminded us, justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it walks in quietly and stands tall. If you believe in stories that matter, stories that reflect courage, truth, and quiet power, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to Mr. Mac's Stories. Your support means everything, every view, every comment, every share. It fuels the stories we tell and reminds us why we tell them. Because here at Mr. Mac's Stories, we don't just tell stories. We tell the kind that stay with you long after the screen fades to black. Thank you for watching. Thank you for feeling. And thank you for walking this journey with us.